You've built the career, you're building the portfolio, you're close to freedom. So what now? Welcome to Life After Enough. Money, meaning, and the life you design when work becomes optional. I'm Nick. I'm racing towards early retirement and figuring out who I become when the job no longer dictates what I do with my time. Let's get into it. What would happen if you pressed pause on your career, not because you felt burnt out, but because you finally decided to stop waiting for permission? Most of us are sprinting through life on autopilot, doing exactly what society expects us to. Working hard, meeting deadlines, chasing titles and building your resume, all while quietly wondering, is this really it? We tell ourselves we'll rest once things calm down, or when we meet some future metric or goal. But then we never do. A sabbatical is that pause. It's the chance to step off the treadmill and remember who you are without the job title. In 2025, I took my own advice. I stepped away from work for 6 months. I got married to the love of my life, had an incredible honeymoon, and spent real time with friends and family. I tested what life might actually feel like when the calendar stopped being dictated by meetings. What I discovered during that time surprised me. In today's episode, we're diving into the sabbatical effect, what it really means to step away from work. This is a topic that's really close to my heart and one that I've lived and breathed during my own sabbatical during 2025. I'll break down the different kinds of breaks you can take, from formal sabbaticals to mini retirements, and talk about how to actually ask for one, how to finance it, and what it really feels like once you're in it. Taking a sabbatical isn't just about rest. It's about testing what freedom feels and tastes like. It's about building a life that's sustainable beyond the paycheck. Whether you're mid-career, still saving, or just starting to think about what your own version of enough is, this episode will help you see how a sabbatical could fit into your journey. Okay, so what is a sabbatical, really? Let's start by unpacking a few terms that float around in this space. The first, of course, is sabbatical. This is usually an employer-approved break of, say, 3 to 12 months. If you're lucky, it's paid, but most of the time it's unpaid. However, your company does agree to keep your job open or a similar one for you for when you return. Think of it as pressing pause, but not delete. The next is a true career break. This one is the self-directed version. You resign, you take the big leap of faith, and you give yourself the time to travel, study, care for family, or simply just reset. It's usually a longer stretch, maybe a year or even more, and you're fully in charge of what happens next. You might also hear about mini retirements, and this is where things get kind of interesting. The original idea came from Tim Ferriss in the 4-Hour Workweek. His argument was simple but radical. Instead of deferring all your freedom to one big retirement at the end of your career, take smaller retirements throughout your life. More recently, Gillian Johnsrud picked up that idea and gave it a modern, more human twist in her book, Retire Often. She reframed it for real people, people with families, responsibilities, and careers that don't fit inside a van on Instagram. Her take is that these mini retirements aren't escapes at all, but they are just strategic pauses. Intentional breaks where you stop, reflect, and recalibrate, not because you're done with work, but because you want to make sure your work still fits the life you're building. And I absolutely love this. It really resonates with me and is relevant to anyone and at any income level. Each of the mini retirements becomes a checkpoint in your journey, a chance to ask, am I still living in alignment with what matters most to me? So whether you call it a sabbatical, a career break, or a mini retirement, the concept is the same. It's about designing space to live now, not waiting until later. When I say sabbatical in this episode, I'm talking about any intentional break you create to step away from the job. Not because you failed, not because you burned out, but because you're giving yourself permission. Pausing there for a moment, isn't it interesting that when most people think about a sabbatical or a career break, the first word that comes to mind is burnout, as if the only valid reason to step away from work is to recover from it? We're so conditioned to see the 9-to-5 grind as the default, the good, the responsible path. that choosing something different can feel almost, well, wrong. By taking time off, you feel rebellious, maybe even irresponsible. We've been taught that productivity equals worth. So rest has to be earned, and slowing down means falling behind your peers. But what if that's completely backwards? That's what taking a sabbatical is really about. Not escape or crisis, but courage. The courage to pause long enough to ask, is the life I'm building still the one I actually want? So in 2025, I took 6 months off. On paper, it was for all the best reasons. I was getting married, I wanted to actually enjoy the honeymoon, and then ease into married life without rushing back to the horror of endless Teams calls and deadlines. But there was something deeper too. I wanted to know what life actually felt like when it wasn't built around work. A little teaser for life after enough. What surprised most people, though, was that I wasn't using the time for something traditionally productive. No MBA, no side hustle, no personal reinvention plan, just life, leisure, space. And believe me, it was sensational. For the first time in years, I didn't even think about work at all. I didn't check my inbox. I didn't wonder what was happening in the office. I just stopped and moved on. And that pause, that clean, guilt-free break was both liberating and humbling because whilst I was living my best life, my company did what companies do. They found someone to fill my role. Projects moved on. Meetings happened without me. It was a powerful reminder that we are all completely replaceable at work, but utterly irreplaceable in our own lives. So, for anyone feeling trapped right now, taking a sabbatical isn't about quitting your life, it's about designing it, pressing pause with purpose. So, with that said, let's dig into some of the practical parts and talk about how you actually ask for a sabbatical from work. So, maybe by this point, you're thinking, okay, Nick, I love the idea of a sabbatical or mini retirement, but how on earth do I ask for one without torpedoing my career? Well, that's a great question. And that's the fear, right? Your career completely falling apart. But I think the real question is different. What if it finally falls into place because of a sabbatical? Taking control of your life and your career is on you. I can say with 100% certainty that your boss won't suddenly appear one day and say, hey, fancy 6 months off to find yourself? You have to ask, clearly, calmly, and with conviction. It takes courage, but remember, courage is just fear with a plan. Okay, step 1, pick your moment. Timing really matters with something like this. Choose a natural transition point that works in the context of your role and your business. Good examples are the end of a major project or the end of the fiscal year, or my preferred one, after a strong performance review, when your value is fresh in everyone's mind. Ideally, you want to make the ask from a position of strength, not exhaustion. Step 2, frame it as an investment and not an escape. This is the biggest mindset shift. You're not leaving your job, you're investing in your future performance. You'll come back re-energized, refocused, and probably more creative than you've been in years. Time away gives you perspective, and you'll be able to do things differently when you return. Frame it as a win-win for you and the company. Step 3, present a plan. Don't just drop the bomb and hope for the best. Remember, you've had this plan in your head for some time, but it's likely the first time your boss or line manager is hearing it. Ask for a sit-down meeting, grab a good cup of coffee, and go into the meeting with a clear structure. Refer to any relevant company policies, present a clear timeline, work out how you think you'd do any handover, suggest some options for coverage, specify your return date. Try and make it easy for your employer to say yes. Do as much of the heavy lifting as you can, and anticipate any pushback and how you might respond. It's really important to show that you've already thought about business continuity, that you're thinking about the team, and acknowledge the impact it'll have on them. Step 4 is ask what you need. Be true to yourself. If you think you need 6 months, ask for it. If it's 12, go for it. Your work can always push back and offer you an alternative. Start the conversation early, float the idea, and feel out the tone. When you lead with calm confidence, people tend to mirror it. So, my story, when I asked for a sabbatical, I did it a full year before I wanted to take it, right after a really strong performance review. I'd done all my homework. I knew the policies, I'd mapped out the approval process, and came with a clear roadmap of what needed to happen next. I was honest about the impact it would have, but I also reminded my manager how much I'd given over the past few years. I explained that this was the longest role I'd ever held, that I loved the team, and that I genuinely wanted to come back recharged and ready to contribute even more. As the requests moved up the corporate chain, I made it as easy as possible for them to say yes. I answered questions quickly, offered solutions, and stayed helpful. And then when my time off actually approached, I documented everything, detailed handover notes, project timelines, and even a little induction plan for my temporary cover. It wasn't just about leaving cleanly, it was also about returning gracefully. I didn't want the team to feel abandoned, and I wanted them to feel supported and confident. And when I finally walked out of the office on that last day, it felt empowering because I hadn't just been given a sabbatical, I'd earned it by being intentional and professional. Now, every organization is different and every ask will sound slightly different, but the principles stay the same. Make it human, make it professional, and crucially, make it easy to say yes. And whatever you do, don't chicken out. The worst that your boss can say is no. But if you never ask, you've already said no to yourself. If they do say no, don't be disheartened. That no doesn't have to be the end of the story. You still have the option to take a career break instead. It's definitely a higher stakes option. You're stepping away without a guaranteed job waiting, but it's also a statement of intent. A conscious decision to take one of those mini retirement style pauses we talked about earlier. The key is just to buffer for it. You can plan the finances, build your runway, and walk away on your terms. It might take a little longer to line things up, but the trade-off is still a taste of freedom. Okay, so the ask is sorted out. So let's talk about the other big practical issue of all of this, the money. Because the question that usually follows, how do I ask for a sabbatical, is, how do I afford it? This is where most people stumble and just give up. They love the idea of a sabbatical, but then the mental calculator kicks in and starts screaming, how can I afford it? What if I run out of money halfway through? Isn't this just being really irresponsible? Well, the good news is you just need intention, some structure, and a good safety buffer. I think it's helpful to break this down into 5 steps. Number 1, start with the dream. Before you even open a spreadsheet or look at your savings account balance, start with a blank page. Dream big. Design your ideal sabbatical, the unencumbered, full-fat, icing on the cake version. What would you actually love to do with your time? Travel, learn something new, train for a marathon. What would a perfect Tuesday look like if it didn't belong to work? Write it all down. Include the wild ideas and the practical ones. And then cost it all out. Every single thing. Flights, accommodation, experiences, even the continuation of your flat white habit that you're probably not going to give up. And don't forget to include all of your fixed real-life expenses that won't just vanish because you're off-grid. Things like your rent or mortgage, insurance, bills, subscriptions, healthcare. When you total it all up, one of 2 things usually happens. You either think, okay, well, that looks doable, actually, or wow, I think I need to rob a bank. If it's the second one, don't panic. That's when you can start playing with the variables. Can you earn a little bit more whilst you're traveling? By consulting or freelancing, house sitting, pet sitting, tutoring even? Or can you make strategic swaps in your plan? Try flying indirect now that you're not time poor. Stay longer, but in fewer places. Trim some of the big experiences, but keep the more intentional ones. With all these levers to play with, suddenly the dream starts to look like something you could actually do. Okay, step 2, know your runway. Once the dream is mapped out, you need to build your financial runway. Start by working out 3 simple numbers. What will be your core expenses? So the things you'll have to pay no matter what. That's the rent, insurance, bills, groceries, healthcare. Number 2, your sabbatical setup costs. This is all the spending you'll do because of the sabbatical itself. So your travel, your experiences, any courses you want to do, etc. And then don't forget to include a lifestyle buffer. And this is your socializing, dining, entertainment, and spontaneous adventures pot. During my sabbatical, I actually created these very same buckets. Each month, I'd pay myself a mini paycheck drawing from each pot. If I overspent one month, well, then I'd scale back the next. It kept me honest and in control. It was like running a small business called Nick's Sabbatical Life, and I was the CFO. When you see the numbers laid out like that, they lose their power to scare you. It becomes something you can manage and it's something you can plan for. And that leads us to step 3, bridging the gap. Now compare your total costs to the savings that you already have. If you need to top it up, that's fine. It just means trading a bit more time for money before your sabbatical starts. If you follow my advice in your ask, then you should still have a good chunk of time ahead of you to save a little more anyway. Then you can set a savings goal, automate it, and hit it over 6, 12, or 18 months. Step 4, redefine risk. We often treat stepping away as the risky move. But what if the real risk is never stepping back to look at your life? A well-planned sabbatical doesn't derail your finances. It tests your systems. It pressure tests your spending, your mindset, and your relationship with enough. You can always earn more money, but you can never earn more time. If you plan intentionally, you're not gambling, you're investing in yourself, your creativity, and your clarity. And then the final step is step 5, freedom on any budget. Your sabbatical doesn't need to be 6 months in a 5-star resort in Tuscany. It could be 3 months of slow living, volunteering, writing, or just taking the space to think. The length matters less than the intent. Every version, from a 2-month pause at home to a full year of traveling the world, delivers something valuable: perspective. The real purpose of a sabbatical isn't escape, it's alignment. Quick pause. If this episode is sparking something for you, hit follow so you don't miss what's coming next. Feel free to share it with someone who'd love it too. It really helps the show to grow. Okay, so we've planned for the sabbatical. We've got our head around the numbers. We've done the ask. We're ready to go. But at the end, life becomes normal again. You have to also consider the return, going back to work. Your inbox will reappear. Your calendar will fill back up. And before you know it, that beautiful stillness starts to slip away. Re-entry is weird. You've changed, even subtly, but the world you're returning to probably hasn't. And that's the first surprise of coming back from a sabbatical. You've had 6 months of perspective and deep thinking, but your workplace has had 6 months of stress and business as usual. So while you might be seeing everything with fresh eyes, others are just trying to get through another Monday. The contrast can feel jarring, lonely, even unhinged. But why do we feel like that? Why does re-entry actually feel hard in practice? Well, I think part of you will want to dive back in, to contribute, to prove that the time off was worth it. But there's another part of you that wants to hold on to what you discovered, that slower pace, that clarity, that peace. The tension between those two selves, the old version who thrived on achievement and the new version who's learned to breathe, is what makes reintegration so tricky. But it's also an incredible opportunity, one where you get to decide what sticks. So from my experience, I think there's 3 top tips for returning to work with intention, preserving what you've achieved in your career, but also overlaying the new you. So tip 1, try and renegotiate your schedule. If your role allows it, use the transition to redesign your week. Can you do compressed days? Hybrid work? Can you extend breaks between projects? You've earned the right to ask. Frame it as protecting your energy, not avoiding responsibility. Tip 2 is to set boundaries before you step back in. Before your very first meeting even hits the calendar, write down your new non-negotiables and then stick to them. When will you log off? When will you say no? You'll never be less busy than you are right now, so decide before the chaos resumes. Tip 3, keep space for what you've discovered. This one's really important. Whether it's your morning walk, your new gym routine, journaling or cooking, whatever anchored you during your sabbatical, schedule it and prioritize it like a meeting. Create a new way of working. Treat it as maintenance for your mental wealth and carry the lessons from the sabbatical forward to the years ahead. Remember, the goal isn't to return to who you were. It's to return as the person you were becoming. That means you don't owe anyone the old version of yourself. Not your boss, not your team, not even your own ego. At the start of the episode, I mentioned that what I discovered during my time off really surprised me because all that freedom didn't exactly feel the way I expected it to. So let's move on to what it actually feels like when the grind finally goes quiet. What happens when work stops and your time is your own? Having thought about this, the best metaphor I can think of is that a sabbatical is a kind of mirror. And what that mirror shows you can be surprising. I expected the classic stuff: more sleep, more sunshine, more steps on my fitness tracker. And it was. It was glorious. The slow mornings, the long coffee walks, the complete lack of Teams notifications. But there was something else too, a kind of quiet and a stillness, one that wasn't just external, but internal too. For the first few weeks, I was buzzing with all the wedding prep, the honeymoon, adventure, travel, novelty. And then somewhere around the end of month 2, the noise dropped off, the adrenaline faded, and then the awkward questions started to creep in. What actually makes me happy when I'm not busy? Who am I without deadlines and goals? What does a meaningful day look like if I don't have to do anything? It was really confronting. Once the scaffolding of work had gone, you're left with a kind of emotional vertigo. That was the first big surprise of my sabbatical. Freedom feels amazing until it feels confusing. So coming back to the mirror effect I mentioned, a sabbatical doesn't necessarily change who you are at your core, but it does reveal who you've been avoiding. If you've been running on stress, it shows you how addicted you were to adrenaline. If you've been living for validation, it shows you how empty that can feel without applause. And if you've been fantasizing about time off, like I was, it tests whether you actually like being alone with your thoughts. And I say that with love because I had to face all of those things myself. After that initial period, I had all the time I ever wanted, but no structure. And it was quite challenging for a while. No one needed me to do anything, which is, on the one hand, really liberating, but also deeply uncomfortable. I realized that whilst I'd been building my financial safety, I hadn't fully built emotional safety. I'd done almost no work at all on the other pillars of enough. And as I've mentioned in earlier episodes, freedom isn't the absence of pressure, it's the presence of peace. And that, I learned, takes practice and patience. Another surprise, it was how much your emotions can swing. Some days I felt euphoric, grateful and grounded and proud that I'd made this thing happen. But on other days, I felt kind of lost, like I'd stepped off a moving treadmill and hadn't quite found my rhythm yet. But that's completely normal. Your body and brain have been wired for decades to produce, to measure your worth through output. And when that just gets taken away, there's a kind of detox, a withdrawal from busyness. And that's the middle part of a sabbatical that no one really talks about, the messy middle, if you will. It's not burnout, but it's also not bliss. It's somewhere in between. But I think that's also where the biggest growth happens. Once the restlessness passes, something actually shifts. You start to feel lighter, clearer, more connected to what matters. And for me, it wasn't until the final stretch of my sabbatical that I really hit that phase, feeling energized again, excited, and ready to start shaping the next chapter of my life with intention. The sabbatical wasn't just a break from work. It's this big rehearsal for the kind of life I actually wanted to live. And once that space and clarity started to arrive, well, then that's when the real sabbatical effect kicks in. With enough stillness, you start noticing what actually gives you the energy. You realize which habits were noise and which ones genuinely bring joy. You rediscover curiosity. Maybe you start writing, creating, or reconnecting with people, learning something new just because it interests you, not because it's productive. I found myself thinking deeply about what I wanted the next chapter of my life to look like. Not just the work, not just the finances, but the rhythm of it. And that's the heart of this podcast. What happens when you've got enough? Enough money, time, and choice. And now you have to decide who you actually want to be. So, what were the unexpected lessons? What were the biggest surprises? They weren't the financial ones at all. The money side turned to be completely mechanical. Once all of my sabbatical pots were fully funded, I didn't really think about them again. The system just worked. And this is likely going to be the same after you reach financial independence. So, what caught me off guard were the emotional surprises, the things no amount of planning or saving or forecasting could really prepare you for. Things like being totally replaceable at work, but irreplaceable in your own life. Freedom without structure feels strange, but that's the point. It forces you to rebuild your life around purpose and not pressure. And then finally, time expands when you stop rushing. A single week off when you're burnt out can feel like a blink. But when you're fully present, a single afternoon can feel, well, infinite. So tying it all back, if you're listening to this and you feel stuck, trapped in the grind, or waiting for someday to arrive, consider this episode your little nudge. A sabbatical doesn't have to be a fantasy. It's a tool. It's a chance to practice life after enough, long before you get there financially. Because if you can learn to find peace, purpose, and identity outside of your job now, you'll be ready for the day when work becomes truly optional later. And maybe that's the greatest surprise of all, that freedom doesn't start the day you quit. It starts the day you pause. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, The Sabbatical Effect, and learned from my experience. I'm so grateful for the time I had away from work. It really was a game changer. I'm now once again excited for what the future holds. Thanks for listening to Life After Enough, a podcast about money, meaning, and the life you design when work becomes optional. If this episode made you rethink your future, share it with someone who's starting to question the script too. You can follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Nick, and I'll see you next week as we keep building a life that's truly ours.